everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of Cleaning Code with Doc Norton. I'm Doc Norton. Last week took a bit of a break. We actually just did some basic refactoring in a test file, maybe a palette cleanser after having removed FileManager before we actually moved into the next big thing. This week we're going to get started with the next big thing. We're actually in JavaClassBuilder, and we are looking at buildClasses. There's actually quite a bit of duplication in here. It's a little bit hard to see because what's happened is we're basically looking to see if the file that we get in is an actual class file, and if it is, we parse it. If it's a container, then we actually instantiate a jar file, and then we call buildClasses jar file. And buildClasses jar file has a bunch of the same stuff in it that this does. And I think there's opportunity here to dry this up. And we're going to go ahead and do that in this episode. But I really think this is going to lead us towards something else. Fundamentally, there's just an issue that I have with extract files. Extract files actually returns either classes or jar files, zip files, war files, so containers basically, but not directories. And I think that's actually where the core problem is. But I want to see if we can clean this up first, and then maybe that gives us a clue as to what is the next thing for us to do. So let's get into it. All right, let's start off with something relatively easy. I just want to start moving things around in here to just kind of clean it up a little bit. So actually, one of the first things I want to do is this final else. I actually want to move it to the beginning of the file as a guard clause. But I can't really do that yet. What I need to do to set for that is make the conditionals a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to actually go ahead and turn this conditional into a method. That'll make it a little bit easier to read, and it will allow me to create a more readable guard clause that I can then push the throw exception into. While we're at it, let's go ahead and move that over into class containers. Now, when we do that, it actually brings over JavaClassBuilder as a parameter, but we don't need it. So let's go ahead and change the signature and get rid of that as well. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now we can go ahead and add the guard clause using both of those conditionals, which are fairly readable at this point. And then go ahead and move our throw of the IO exception into the guard clause and remove the last else in this statement. All right, so let's grab this. We'll go ahead and add it in up top. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, a little bit of formatting maybe. And then let's go ahead and remove that else. And it looks like we've got a compilation error. Let's put the else back and see if we can take care of this missing return statement. All right, so let's get the if and the else if to both return result. And then let's go ahead and pull result out of here and make it the single return from the entire method. All right, now we've got a proper single return. Let's go ahead and get rid of that last else statement that throws the exception, and everything should work. All right, now let's inline the buildClasses method that receives the jar file. Just want to pull everything up into the same method so that we can better see the duplication we're dealing with here. All right, we've inlined this, and it doesn't know about result. So we've got some funky stuff where JavaClasses is being used and then assigned to result. So let's just go ahead and collapse that all down and use result. All right, we're getting there. Everything's using result, but we've still got some differences between the top half of this and the bottom half of this that are just coincidental or whatever. So for example, the Java class that we're using in one is JC and the other is parsed classes. And we've got a check to see if our input stream is null before we close it in one, but not the other. So let's just kind of reconcile that sort of stuff. All right, the two halves of this conditional are actually pretty similar at this point. The difference basically is that the top half is using a file to create the buffered input stream, and the bottom half is using a jar file and an entry to create the buffered input stream. I don't know if it's absolutely necessary. It's probably not, but I'm going to go ahead and pull these out into their own methods. Sometimes it helps me to just sort of move some things around and look at them in different compositional perspectives. To think about kind of what's happening here. So that's what we're going to do now. And it'll actually make this look a little bit cleaner, and then we'll deal with how do we actually reconcile the small difference between these. All right, now both of these extracted methods currently receive our result collection and then manipulate it. I don't like that. They're both voids and they receive the thing that they change. What I want to do is alter these so that they actually return a collection and they don't receive the result collection in the first place. We're going to start with the file. First thing I'm going to do is just make it return a collection and go ahead and flesh it out so that it actually does that. I'm not actually changing anything in the calling method above quite yet. Then we'll go ahead and pull out the collection parameter, and we'll change the calling method to not use that parameter, obviously, and then to add the response from this into our result in the calling method. Okay, that one looks good so far. We're still passing in the result, but let's go ahead and do this now for the jar as well. And then we will remove the parameter where we're passing in the result since we're not doing anything with it anyway. All right, and now we'll go ahead and change the signatures, getting rid of that unnecessary parameter. All right, so we're green. I'm going to take advantage of this moment to clean up this iterator and turn it into a for loop. First thing we really need to do is go ahead and stream the entries and filter them, and that will give us a collection that we can then easily iterate over with a for loop. All right, the filter we're going to create is the same as the conditional inside our current iterator. So we're just looking to see if we can accept this class file name. So the only thing it's going to return back are those entries that are valid file names. We're just going to go ahead and collect them to a list. And of course, we actually have to have a variable that this result is being stored in. So let's go ahead and call it entries. And then we will iterate over that and we will get each entry out of it. Now we can get rid of all that enumeration next stuff. Move this up. We actually don't need the conditional anymore because we took care of that in the filter. And let's make sure that we're using entry. I'm actually going to take this one step further, and I'm going to get rid of entries as a intermediate variable. The way we're going to do that is we're going to actually create a new method that does the streaming of the jar file with the filter, and then we will inline entries. All right, I'm pretty happy with where we are. We can see that buildClasses really has been condensed down. We get what's going on here. We can see that the difference really between a class and a jar is the jar, we actually iterate over the jar entries and then basically parse those entries. So the real difference here, aside from that iteration, is the way that we get our buffered input stream. And so the next thing we're going to do here is going to resolve that issue and really finally clean this up. So one more pretty big step, and I think we're done with this episode. All right, what we're going to do here is we're going to introduce a new class called StreamSource, which is essentially a factory. The way this is going to work is you're going to be able to initialize StreamSource with either a file or with a jar file and an entry, and then you can ask it to give you back a buffered input stream, and it will give you back the right buffered input stream. We're going to start with the file, because that's an easy place to start, and then we're going to kind of force in the jar file and entry to complete the definition of this class and the way that we get the buffered input stream back out of it. Okay, that refactoring was fairly straightforward, and now I'm going to kind of wedge in the jar and entry. So I'm going to create another constructor. It's going to receive a jar file. It's going to receive a zip entry. Of course, those don't exist in the class right now, so we're going to go ahead and add those as fields as we go along. Okay, those exist. Let's go ahead and update invoke so that it is aware of the jar file and the zip entry as well. So now when we call invoke, depending on how we've constructed this thing, it's going to return back a buffered input stream either for a jar file or a file. So let's just go ahead and check and see if jar file is not equal to null and the zip entry is not equal to null. If that's true, then we'll return the buffered input stream from the jar file for this entry. Otherwise, we're going to return a buffered input stream for the file itself. All right, some of you have probably noticed that I've had a compilation error for the last 10 seconds, but sometimes I just get a little too thick-headed. So I'm going to continue to plow forward as if everything's okay, because I haven't checked in quite a while. So let's go ahead and call StreamSource with jar file entry, invoke, and then finally going to recognize that, like, oh wait, something doesn't work. So should have caught that sooner, but let's go ahead and clean it up. We're going to make sure that jar file and zip entry and file are all initialized in our various constructors. All right, a quick little refactor here to make this a little bit more readable. Let's just go ahead and pull this out into its own method. Okay, we're almost there. The two methods that we extracted out early on and started manipulating are now almost identical. The only difference between them is the way in which they actually instantiate our stream source. And we're going to go ahead and pull that out, move it to the top of both of those methods. Now save one line. They're pretty much identical. So I'm going to go through the steps of, I'm going to re-inline them into the original calling method, and then I'm going to pull out what's common into a better named method. So I'm just going to go through this step by step. All right, stream sources at the top of both of these. Let's go ahead and re-inline them just to get them all into the same place. Okay, now let's grab what is common between both of them, and we're going to extract that out into a better named method. Now, I could have done this before I re-inlined them. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but I just decided to do it this way. And let's go ahead and name this parse from source. Okay, now we really don't need parsed result or stream source, so let's just go ahead and inline all of those and tighten this up a little bit. All right, so just a quick review. What we're looking at here is where we started. buildClasses has an if, an else if, and another else we're throwing. We've got buildClasses sometimes calls another buildClasses with a jar file, which has got a bunch of logic in it. So that's where we started. And then we finish here. buildClasses now has the guard clause that checks to determine if we should even be building classes. If not, it throws the exception. Then if it's an acceptable class file, we go ahead and parse from source. Our source stream is initialized with a file. If it is a valid container, we go ahead and get the jar file, and we iterate through that, and we parse from source, our source stream initialized with a jar file and an entry. Parse from source, fairly straightforward. Get jar file entries, fairly straightforward. And then our new class, stream source here. Right, fairly clean. So we are again in a position where maybe more lines of code, but we've actually moved the responsibility around. I think it's actually easier to understand what's going on here. It is certainly more malleable, extensible, etc. Still things that we could do here to clean this up, and really the underlying issue, and from my perspective, still is that extract files returns back sometimes class files, sometimes jar files. So still going to play around, see if maybe we can, correct that issue. But this is good for this episode. I think we got quite a bit done. So, as usual, folks, if you're enjoying this, please make sure that you like them. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And I'm not sure what we're going to do in the next episode, but we will continue from where we've left off here. Maybe take a look at how do we clean this up so extract files is returning only classes, or maybe what's going to end up happening is we're pushing some of this responsibility elsewhere. I don't know. We'll see. Catch you in episode 9.